Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, coming at you live to talk about episode 6 of Star Trek Discovery, entitled Lethe. And I thought this episode was leaps and bounds that much more spectacular than the previous episode. If you watched my episode discussion video talking about the previous episode, Choose Your Pain, I loved the entire arc of the episode to do with Lorca and the introduction of Ash Tyler and Harry Mudd and everything like that. But everything else that happened in the episode, especially the discovery side of things, just felt, I don't know, off-putting, and it definitely was punctuated by the dropping of the F-bombs and everything like that. And that's one of the things I've heard a lot of people talking about in the aftermath of that episode. They've been saying, oh, that made these characters that much more relatable and that much more contemporary. And, you know, oh, this is the way people actually talk, off duty and all this kind of stuff. And barring the fact that the characters were on duty and it was somewhat mindless. And I thought wholly unnecessary use of that particular kind of language in that given scene. And I've talked at length in posts over on my Facebook account as well as in comments all over YouTube and everything about the fact that it wasn't so much trouble that I had with the words, the terminology, the cursing. It was more so that I felt there was no impact, no poignancy, no emotional gravitas to the usage of it. And I even talked about different ways you could have, utilized that language to make it punctuated, A scenario I sort of concocted was you have a whole bunch of Klingon raiders that are, attacking Discovery, and they're expelling all of their phaser turrets, they're expelling all of their photon torpedoes, their shields are completely breaking down, and just as they get rid of the last Klingon raider, and the shields are gone and all their weapons are shot, suddenly the Klingon cavalry comes in. They warp in, birds of prey, battle, ships and everything like that. And then someone on the bridge crew might be like, oh, F. Or the captain might be like, oh, F me, And it would have been resounding that much more. Rather than the mindless, unnecessary, sort of shoehorned in, ham-fisted way that line was delivered in the previous episode. And so a lot of the discussion after that episode has been very sort of divisive between Trekkies, Trekkers, non-Trek fans, people who are just, exemplifying it for the sake of, oh, expletives in Star Trek. Yay! And everything like that. Whereas I felt this episode went leaps and bounds in the right direction to make these characters personable, to make them, the interactions between them relatable. You start the episode off with Burnham training, for all intents and purposes, Tilly, jogging through the corridors of Discovery. I love that, zooming in shot that you got. To kind of harken back to me, The Cage, where the camera zooms in to the bridge of the Enterprise with Captain Pike and Spock and Number One on the bridge and everything like that. It was something sort of similar, cut from the same cloth. And there they are running corridors. And the topic of discussion is, as far as Michael Burnham's more tutelary, appraisal of Tilly, if you really desire to become a captain, this is kind of the track you want to be on. A figurative track coinciding with the literal running track they're on. And she's saying, you want to get on like a Constitution class like the Enterprise and everything, which I appreciated that reference much more than all of the captains, the exemplary captains on the screen that Saru was looking at in the previous episode, which was really on the nose. I like that it was just sort of a passive reference. But I really felt for these two characters in coming together and being friendly. And I felt like Michael Burnham in this episode was on a thorough arc. A lot of people have been saying about Sonequa Martin Green and about the character of Michael Burnham that the character is wooden and stilted in the performance, in the acting, unrelatable, unlikable, and something that struck me from the word go all the way back to the very first episode is the simple fact that she is of two worlds. Much like Spock, she has her human side and she has her Vulcan side. The Vulcan upbringing has, really shaped and molded her psyche, the way she is. Internally, she is, she spent more of her life being brought up in Vulcan surroundings. So that stunted delivery, that, passive, almost emotionless, joyless, way of acting and reacting to other people, interacting with them. Yeah, that's kind of on purpose, folks. This was never lost on me, but it actually occurred to me in this particular episode because by the end, she's smiling. She's exhibiting emotional, outpourings and outcroppings, and she's shaking people's hands with that big ear-to-ear grin. And it's like we're finally seeing the human side of her, Michael Burnham, coming out. And so I'm hoping this is something that is not lost on people. One of the stellar aspects, getting back to the interconnectivity, the interplay between these characters, the characterization that I love, though, as I say, was stemming out of the relationship dynamic between Burnham and Tilly and their training and, getting breakfast burritos and getting healthy food and everything, whatever like that. And then they're, sort of commingling with Ash Tyler. Now, Ash Tyler is a character. Man, I used the phrase on the nose, and I used it very disparagingly in my episode 5 discussion video. I said everything that was on the nose was poorly on the nose in the previous episode. In this episode, it was spot on to me. As far as when we first meet Ash Tyler, he and Lorca are in a training sort of simulation. There's a holographic training thing. And I know, pause given, there was never on the old, NCC 1701 in the 60s, there was never any holographic sort of, technology or anything like that. So they're breaking the mold. And at first, that did occur to me as well. I'm like, oh my God, is this like a holodeck? A battle simulation on a holodeck on the Discovery? And I was like, no, that doesn't really fit. But no, wait. Has anyone ever watched the animated series where a holodeck sort of technological thing was, an apparatus was implanted onto the 1701 Enterprise? So this is probably a precursor to that. Because Discovery, it is explicitly stated in this episode, it's not the flagship of the fleet, but it's the most advanced vessel in all of Starfleet, with utmost advanced technologies and things like that. Leaps and bounds probably than the Constitution-class starships that are on active duty, which have been around for some time. This is a ship that's fresh off the machine block, as we were sort of told in episode 3 when we're debuted to the Discovery, the vessel itself. And so all of the things that are going on aboard it are precursor technology to things we will see in later Star Trek series, even the animated series, which is not too far off after the original series ended. They had holographic technology that was brought aboard the Enterprise. This is the precursor probably to that, unless I am forgetting some details that, which is very possible. I haven't watched the animated series in a long time, but maybe that technology was gotten by Vulcans or another alien species had constructed it and the Federation was adapting it into their technology. I don't remember, but we don't find out the origins of this particular holographic battle simulation, tech either, so that it could still be a well and true, precursor to that. That's a lot of time talking about the holographic battle simulation, room. What I was going to say is what I really found to be on the nose to a clever extent in this episode. Everybody was left by the end of the previous episode thinking Ash Tyler's a Klingon spy. And if he's not just any Klingon spy, he's probably the albino Klingon Vogue. This was something I spoke about in my video discussing the episode before I'd ever seen anyone else's videos or written reviews or anything like that about the previous episode, Choose Your Pain. I was left suspecting and speculating and theorizing that Ash Tyler was actually a Klingon plant, was a spy. I said, not to sound archaic, but the ethnicity of the actor, the color of his hair, the way his beard is, everything like that, it conforms to the way the Klingons looked in the original series. And wouldn't that just be tantamount, spectacular, glorious, to have a human sort of, reconfigured Klingon, a Klingon who had been surgically altered, and probably, per L'Rell's telling Voq that he would have to lose everything, he was a Klingon who had nothing to begin with. Sort of the fill-in for T'Kuvma, who was about unifying all of the warring houses of the Klingon Empire and everything like that. An essence of purity and honor not all of which conforms to the familiarity we have with the Klingons in the history of Star Trek. But he would have to lose everything. What does that mean? And I and many others have speculated that that meant he would have to lose everything that fundamentally makes him Klingon. So it would then make sense if he had to go under the tutelage and repurposing, in a sense, reconfiguring mentally, physically, of the matriarchy, as L'Rell puts it, and then 3 weeks later, however long the turnover is, suddenly Ash Tyler is Vogue, spy in disguise, mental retraining, and all these things. What I found to be, getting back to my terminology, on the nose, cleverly so, was the fact that it seemed as if the writers knew you were going to be suspecting that. They knew, they already assumed that you were going to think that. So let's wave the flag, the banner, right in the face of our viewers and play with it, tongue-in-cheek like. As Lorca and Ash Tyler are getting done, wrapping up their, fighting against holographic Klingons and everything like that, a lot of their dialogue is Lorca trying to pinpoint the reality of the background of Ash Tyler, who he claims to be. He says he's from Seattle. Well, technically, as Lorca puts it, you're so many hundreds of miles outside of Seattle, and I want brass tacks, legitimate facts. I don't want minced words. I don't want, sort of nearabouts. I want exact terminology. I want exacting terminology. And so, with their dialogue going back and forth in that early scene between Lorca and Ash Tyler, it's very much waving it in your face. Oh, do you think he's a Klingon? Could he be a Klingon? Even Lorca kind of sort of thinks he might be a Klingon. He's testing him. He's checking him. He checked his background. He's, questioning him on all this stuff, testing him on all these facts about Ash Tyler and everything like that. The one thing that, as far as we know, has not yet transpired is a medical checkup for Ash Tyler. Because, surely they only outwardly changed the appearance of him if he were a Klingon spy. Internally, the organs and everything should still primarily be the same, you would think. So if Discovery's doctor had scanned him, surely that would give us a heads up. And then there's also the fact that there's the Tribble. The Tribble was gone from Lorca's desk in his ready room in this episode, and everyone who has ever watched Star Trek knows Tribbles immediately react to Klingons. And so all that would have needed to happen is for Ash Tyler to walk in Lorca's ready room, and that Tribble would have gone back guano. And so that would have been a thorough tip of the hat, and that apparently hasn't happened. So you have Lorca giving him a position as chief of security. And it's like, again, it's waving that banner right in front of your nose. Is he a Klingon? Do you think he is? You do think he is. We know you think he is. Maybe he is. But then again, maybe he isn't. Because the whole arc of the character, which then leads into what I was already talking about the interpersonal interconnectivity between Burnham and Tilly. They introduce themselves to him. He's in the mess. He's eating food. And I immediately liked their jiving off of each other. I liked, Tilly's calling you crazy kids, kicking Burnham to shake his hand and everything, and the reluctance there on her part, which again is a stemming off of her Vulcan upbringing. She's not used to, having emotional outpourings, whether those are very reserved ones of just smiling and laughing, to all out and out being angry or crying, very emotional and all this kind of stuff. So she needs prodding, she needs prompting, and Tilly is the one to give that to her, where she is teaching Tilly sort of, the idea of what kind of command track she ought to be on, and how to, pursue that, and what career choices to make, and everything like that, what would benefit her more if she really wants a stringent through line to a captaincy and all this kind of stuff. We have Tilly being the emotional equator there, the other half that is trying to appeal to the very conflictual, emotional half of Michael Burnham, and prodding her on, and making her try to be, friendly to Ash Tyler and everything like that. And I thoroughly liked that. The whole arc of his character, as I said, throughout the course of this episode, being the shuttle pilot who subsequently helps them go and find Sarek, who's on this ambassadorial mission and everything, very hush-hush. More on that in a moment. He becomes very sort of signature Starfleet by the end of the episode. You could almost completely and entirely wipe away any suspicion you had at the start of the episode and the end of the previous that, oh, this is a Klingon spy. because he is the most upright, perfect example of a Starfleet character, a very humanistic, realistic character. And I couldn't help but think of the irony as we finally see that Vulcan wall breaking down with Burnham by the end, after everything has been done and accomplished, and she's able to smile, and she offers her hand to him again, reintroduces herself. She's like, we really haven't been introduced before. She's smiling. She has that emotional outpouring, as I say. And Ash Tyler's like, when she's questioning, what are all these things I'm feeling? I mean, I feel hope, but I feel despair. I feel sad, but I feel joy. All these conflictual things. And I just thought it would be hella ironic if he's a Klingon spy and he's the one who's just like, well, that's being human, So there is that clever undertone if he does prove to be a Klingon spy. By the end of the episode, you could almost eschew that entirely away. Nah, he's legit. He's brass tacks. He's Starfleet. He's human. And all bets are off. But I feel like because of that on-the-nose dialogue between he and Lorca at the start of the episode, and then the way everything ended by the end of the episode, it just kind of solidifies with me that, yeah, he probably is a Klingon spy. I'll be surprised if he's not, put it that way. Whether he's Volk or not remains to be seen. But if he isn't a Klingon spy, at the very least, I will be surprised. And, getting back to Sarek now, a lot of the Vulcan-relating stuff in this episode, to me, really harkened back to Star Trek Enterprise. Especially the 4th season, we had I think it was a 3-part story taking place on Vulcan. And we saw that there were Vulcan extremists. Now, the only sort of conflictual thing about that is this is 100 years on from that. And so these sort of logical fanatics, these logical extremists, which seems like an oxymoron. It's kind of like, it kind of went over my head. I was like, is that really a thing? Is that serious? These are sort of racist Vulcans who don't want any interconnectivity, especially with humanity. And they think the idea of bridging the gap between all of these different, Federation worlds and everything like that is impure and wrong and such like that. I thought this was really compelling. But it's not too far-reaching from things we saw in evidence in Star Trek Enterprise. And I've talked about it before, things that we've seen in Star Trek before that some people are highly criticizing as being outlandish and unacceptable and unlike Star Trek. This episode was full of things that were, clear on Star Trek, things that Star Trek has done before, check boxes marked. As far as the Vulcans, there being factions within Vulcan that were against that, were about Vulcan purity and things of that sort. Felt humanity was more of a problem and a burden than something good, something to commune with. We've seen that before. That happened in Star Trek Enterprise. To know that's still something that exists is somewhat, distressing mildly, but at the same time, I mean, Burnham seems to consider it as being a minority, so it's not something very large, anything like that. And that's hopeful in any case. But everything about the interconnectivity with Sarek and the Vulcans, the Katra, the idea of the Katra, I've talked about how Jonathan Archer, in that very 2 or 3-parter, the Vulcan 3-parter in Season 4 of Enterprise, dealt with his connectivity with the Katra of Surak, the sort of Vulcan elder, the one who taught logic and all these kinds of things. And he was able to commune mentally with that essence of Surak. So we're seeing that. We're also, in Enterprise as well, there was the sort of personal connectivity between T'Pol and Trip Tucker, the engineer of the NX-01. They had a romantic relationship. It was something that went very deep, and arguably so. We see that by the end of this episode. Sorry about that. I lost the signal as I was about to say. The interconnectivity between Sarek and Michael Burnham, these are things that we've seen in Enterprise. Between T'Pol and Trip, over many light years, they were able to commune with each other. Very similarly so, as is utilized in this episode between Burnham and Sarek, where she's trying to save him. And I found that utmost absolutely compelling. Here he is, sort of a victim of a Vulcan extremist, a logic extremist, who, nukes himself and mortally injures Sarek. And she kind of has to use like a sort of Vulcan echolocation to find him in this nebula. This very colorful, I might add, nebula. I'm not sure how I feel about it, the special effects there. I thought it was very, prismatic, very colorful. And it did kind of remind me of some of the special effects that we would see in episodes of the original series. But then the shot that started the episode where Sarek is first leaving for this ambassadorial mission looked very video gamey, did not look as resounding. So, I could take or leave some of the cinematics and special effects in this episode. But that contra connectivity across light years, there is precedent for it, is basically what I've been sort of building to saying. And as sort of a contrast to the very stoic, very reserved Vulcan aspect of Michael Burnham, we have Stamets in this episode, who is all out and out the Mad Hatter now. Ever since hooking himself up to the mycelial network and everything like that, and sort of spore jumping the Discovery in the previous episode, again apparently doing it in this episode. The walls are completely down for this guy. He's like the Mad Hatter, completely. No. And I thought that was really great because it's analogous to the whole aspect of the upbringing of Michael Burnham with Amanda, Spock's and Sarek, Spock's mother, Sarek's wife, her adoptive mother, reading her Alice in Wonderland. And now we have this character he's over the top emotional, and I like him that much more now. As he was stoic and kind of just an a-hole, in previous episodes. I didn't like him. I didn't immediately warm to him, and I love him now. Just he is so ecstatic about the madness that that is intrinsic to Michael Burnham's talking about using the Katra that she has containing within her of Sarek, the connectivity to try to echolocate him, figure out where he is, and go on this rescue mission, which is breaking all the rules and everything like that. It's just his being that much more ecstatic about it, thinking she's all kinds of crazy and loving every drip and minute of it. I was loving every drip and minute of it. And that, again, goes back to a perfect prime example, an exemplary example of making these characters personable and relatable and likable. You didn't need 2 F-bombs in succession to win me over, is what I'm saying, as they tried to shoehorn in ham-fistedly in the previous episode. And so all of that was fantastic. They do successfully get Sarek back, and we see a genuine growth on the part of Michael Burnham and her interconnectivity with Tilly, growing a sort of connectivity with Ash Tyler. Ash Tyler as a character has become very likable, even though there is still that idea that, again, they were sort of waving it in front of your face. Is he a Klingon? Is he not a Klingon? Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. Maybe he's Starfleet. Maybe he's human. All that kind of stuff. I'm having such a ball with that, a blast with all of that. And then you have Lorca. Lorca's kind of the end game for me for this episode, where it's like, a lot of people have been saying, oh, this must be taking place in the mirror universe. And that is completely wrong. That's completely way off, because this would have been the Terran Empire, not the Federation. This wouldn't have been Starfleet. The Terran Empire has existed already in the universe, in the mirror universe, that has already been established for at least 100 years by now. If we go back to the In a Mirror Darkly, mirror universe 2-parter from Star Trek Enterprise, the Terran Empire is already a thing. If it's not a thing in this series, then this is not the mirror universe. So what we really glean from his, connecting with the Admiral lady is the fact that he was a good captain, and he kind of has a little bit of an essence of Kirk going on and putting the schmooze on this lady who's come to, observe him and do a sort of a psychological check on him, which I'm sure didn't involve getting in bed with him, but that's how it ended up. And, Lorca reminded me of Kirk in that moment, that sort of, well, I can think of something we could do better in the next 50 minutes if you really want to talk, and she takes off the badge and, whatever like that. But then the nightmare ensues, where she's looking at the scars. I don't know if these are scars he received as per Klingon torture in the previous episode, or something that's been there for much longer. But in feeling around on his back, she shocks him awake, and he immediately draws a phaser, and she knows he's gone. In that scene, it was intense, utmost intense, and we see Lorca the most vulnerable he has been begging, pleading for her not to take Discovery away from him, not to take this opportunity away from him. He's been lying on psych evals. He's been saying he's been ready, but he hasn't, and he needs help. And I was surprised that he admitted that. But I thought very, very pointedly that he was going to grab that phaser and kill her. You know, like, no, this doesn't leave this room. How would he have explained that away? I don't know. But I was almost expecting a gut reactionary grabbing the phaser and just disintegrating her right then and there. So what she realized about him would not leave that room, and then make up some story later. You know, I don't know, fabricate records, do whatever you needed to do, say she was on a shuttle and the shuttle blew up or whatever like that. So it was very advantageous for him that the Klingon Cole had orchestrated her kidnapping, thinking he was going to get Sarek. And because of the intervention of Vulcan extremists, logical extremists, that didn't happen. So rather he gets this Federation admiral. And so the opportunistic side of Lorca, in the end, sees him, rather than going and being the cavalry to go in and save her, he's very dismissive about it. When Saru comes and says, should we not go after her? Usually you would exhibit wanting to, jump the rails and suddenly go get her and everything. And he's much more passive. He's much more, send, a message to Starfleet. See what our orders might be. The importance of the ship. Suddenly the importance of the ship matters more than anything to him. He tells Ash Tyler, go in and get Sarek. Don't lose Michael Burnham. If there's even, one of the hairs on her head comes back incomplete, don't you bother coming back. But the Admiral will wait for our orders. So all in all told, this episode was, to me, spectacular. I was riveted. I was compelled. I loved all of the interconnectivity, again, the interrelatability of these characters, the interplay there, the relatability. It was on point, stellarly, exemplary so, where it just failed me in the previous episode, and largely because of the ill-timed and ham-fisted usage of curse words, of F-bombs, where they could have been that much more. This is wartime. You could have come up with any other dozen storylines and plot lines to implant that language that would have carried weight to it, that would have carried an impact. And where people have said subsequently, since then, that this made these characters likable and more realistic, I didn't find that to be the case. It didn't impact me that way. I found the way they were all interacting in this episode to be leaps and bounds that much more so relatable, and making them that much more so likable. And that's just my own subjective taste. That's my own personal taste. Love it or leave it, give and take, whatever like that. That's what you're going to get in these videos. I can just only tell you how I'm left thinking and feeling by the end of it. What I'm left thinking, how I'm left feeling. And so yeah, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. If you have made it to this point in the video, I know it cut off about halfway through, or maybe a little more than 20 minutes through. Hopefully it's just going to show up as one long video, that started recording again. And but if you've made it at this point, here, want a Jolly Rancher? I don't have, in lieu of a cookie. I'd offer you a cookie, but I have none at the moment. And my applause to you, and my accolades to you, if you're watching now at this, end juncture of the video. So yeah, otherwise it'll be pretty much it for me on this. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 6 of Star Trek Discovery, entitled Lethe. If you've seen it as well, love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below, but I thoroughly loved it. And that's all I can relate, how I was left feeling. So yeah, otherwise, I hope to hear from you in the comments. Hope to see you here next time as well. I'm looking really forward to the next episode, because it's going to be a time loop episode, and I love those in Star Trek. A lot of people said after a time they got a little, sort of regurgitated. It was always the same thing, the reset button. And I'm sure that's kind of going to be the case here, but maybe they're going to be a little more creative. So I'm going to be very highly anticipating seeing what that brings about. And yeah, otherwise, we'll catch you all later. Peace.